Now, let's hear the view of Alicia Kearns. She's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I asked her if she also agrees that the Foreign Secretary's comments today mark at least a significant shift from the British government.
I do. So not necessarily the recognition we need a two-state solution. That's been the UK government's position for a very long time. But his suggestion that we might recognise Palestine, this is a fundamental change in UK position. It's a very welcome one from my perspective. But what I need to tease out of the government over the next few days is this a posturing position to show Israel that unless they reform their behaviours, unless they change some of their targeting, that there are tools that we have available to us? Or is it a genuine commitment towards a Palestine state, which is where we should be going?
In other words, I suppose, does he mean it? And now we know that David Cameron has felt quite strongly about this policy for a very long time. He's been pro-Palestinian, interested in Palestine for a long time. And the way he talks about it, we must sort of understand, scope out, sketch out, if you like, what a future Palestinian state would feel like, would look like. It doesn't feel very airy-fairy. It feels like he wants a proper plan.
I think he does want a proper plan. Look, he's a serious grown-up politician with serious grown-up plans. We've seen since he came in as Secretary of State that he has shifted the government's position gradually and carefully, like someone who has held the reins before knows how to do. And I do think he wants a serious plan. He wrote to me only this week to confirm that my proposal since November that we needed a Palestinian contact group, that he is flying around the Middle East to do exactly that. But I think also what's good about him is he's very fair and balanced. I think it's very difficult to say he's either, rabidly pro-Israel or rabidly pro-Palestine. I think he's very balanced and he genuinely is focused, I believe, and I do think this is unfinished business for him, towards getting towards a solution that ends the instability. He
is quite clearly shifting the dial, however,
yes.
And that requires, if it's going to get anywhere, the Americans along on side as well. So presumably the next part of this is to persuade the Americans of the same idea.
Yes, but I think that requires a lot more work. And in an election year, I think that's far less likely. Having been in DC only 2 weeks ago, look, there were some who were saying, let's not give support to Ukraine, instead give more support to Israel. I think this has become a very difficult political issue in America. For us to adopt recognition of Palestinian statehood, I think it's important we say we don't need the US to come on board to do that. That should be something the UK, on its own merits, in its own way, should make a decision on. Many other countries have recognised them. But on the wider shift towards a solution, of course, we need the Americans.
We are responsible for what we say, but what we can't do is shift things on the Middle East, particularly, I would suggest, while Benjamin Netanyahu is there as Prime Minister, because he's already made it clear he is completely, fundamentally, viscerally and entirely against this idea.
Absolutely, and I think there are serious questions about how we get to a long-term peace proposal while he's still in charge, but also how little the Israeli government seems to be listening. So we had the ICJ interim ruling last week. A lot of that ruling was based on the language, the rhetoric of the Israeli government, and yet you saw Ben Gvir only on Sunday. I think they're now saying it was either 10 or 100, I don't want to get that number wrong, but a large number of the Israeli government attended this conference over the weekend saying we must remove all Palestinians and extend settlements even further. I mean, they don't seem to be listening. For people who are genuine friends of Israel, this is a very, very dangerous moment, isn't it? I think it's so difficult for all of us. I've sat in many bunkers working with Israeli soldiers. I had such pride in working alongside them and the way in which they conducted themselves. But we are seeing an Israeli state who, again, as you and I discussed last March, we haven't learnt how to be a critical friend to them. You have an Israeli population who themselves were deeply unhappy with the Netanyahu government. So we are in a really difficult place where domestic Israeli politics is the furthest away from peace that we need them to be. And meanwhile, the IDF are today doing things that you utterly abhor, including attacking a British medical charity. So this is truly horrifying. So we saw on the 19th of January a British siloed building that is completely isolated from others. It was the home to Medical Aid for Palestine, a British charity, and the IRC, which of course David Miliband is chief executive of. It was bombed by the Israeli Defence Forces. We know that from an F-16 jet. But on the 22nd of December, the UK Defence Attaché in Tel Aviv had confirmation from the IDF that they knew this was a humanitarian site. They'd marked it as sensitive and it'd been marked as humanitarian. So what changed in just under a month that the IDF went from saying this is a protected site to being bombed? And we were very lucky. There were 4 British GPs inside it. They were harmed, but thankfully their lives weren't taken. The government says they've raised it with the Israelis. I think really we're looking for the Israeli ambassador needs to be called in to answer on this. And we need the Israelis to answer how in the world a site like this, a humanitarian protected site, was bombed.
was very, very significant. What would you say to some of your colleagues who, when Andrew Mitchell was addressing the House and all of this earlier on today, were worried that talking about a two-state solution, talking about recognising a Palestinian state, was effectively rewarding Hamas for their terrorist activities?
I think we have to be really, really careful about this. I abhor everything about Hamas. I think I'm the only MP who stood up and said that what they did on October 7th was a crime against humanity. I believe that. But we cannot and we must separate the Palestinian cause with the terrorists who have tried to control and subdue the Palestinian people and who took control in 2006. There have not been elections since. They do not represent the Palestinian people. Gaza is not all of Palestine. I think we have to be really careful about this. Just as when I lobby my criticisms against the Israeli government for some of their actions, I'm not criticising the Israeli people or the state of Israel. And I think for those who wish to condemn those who deny Israeli statehood, they must also be equally willing to condemn those who deny Palestinian statehood.
Very interesting. Now, something else which has Middle Eastern links you raised in the House of Commons today is the future of the Daily Telegraph, not being very pleasant towards the Prime Minister at the moment, but nonetheless facing a takeover by Redbird IMI, which is part American venture capitalist owned and part the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
Why are you so worried?
So some people say, well, isn't this just another Murdoch scenario? But it's so different. So Murdoch was a foreign national. This is a foreign state taking ownership of what is our critical national infrastructure. You know, people listening to you, Andrew, they listen to you to know what is going on, to make sure that you are holding people like me to account, that you know what is going on and exposing either issues at home and abroad. If all of a sudden you were in hock to a foreign state,
if I was being paid by a foreign state, whether it was France or Abu Dhabi or Russia or anywhere, it would be different. So for you, this is a red line being crossed potentially in the British media, because it does seem to a lot of people as if the Redbird bid is in the lead now and is going to succeed.
And it does appear to be at the moment. I just don't know enough. But yes, it's all about the basic premise of, in the same way, I do not want to see other critical national infrastructure in the hands of foreign states because it makes us vulnerable. It is the same with our media. We need it for our democracy, and we always pride ourselves on the strength of British media, and so does the world, really.